What teams look for more than anything from rookies is growth. And when you really break down Tate Ratledge's first NFL season with the Detroit Lions, that word explains almost everything about where he is right now and why this offseason matters so much for him and for this offensive line. If you think back to Week 1 in Green Bay, it was a rough introduction to the league for Ratledge. The speed, the power, the leverage battles, everything hit fast. But what matters is not how it starts, it's how it trends. And by the time the season reached its later stretch, you could clearly see a different player on the field wearing no 69 at right guard. Over his final 12 games, Ratledge did not allow a single sack. That alone tells a story, especially for a rookie starting in the interior of the offensive line. He surrendered only 4 quarterback hits during that span. And when the full season was evaluated, his Pro Football Focus grade came in at 70.2, ranking him 32nd among all guards in the NFL. As a run blocker, his grade ranked 19th, which shows he was already impacting the game in an area this team values deeply. Across 17 starts at right guard, Ratledge allowed 2 sacks, 9 quarterback hits, and 13 quarterback hurries while playing more than 1,000 snaps. For a rookie, that workload and that level of improvement is not something the coaching staff ignores. What makes this even more interesting is how Ratledge himself views the season. He is not satisfied. He has been very clear that while the play improved compared to the beginning of the year, he does not believe he played up to the standard of this offensive line or the standard of the Detroit Lions. He called the season disappointing in that sense, not because it lacked progress, but because he expects more from himself. He sees year 1 as a baseline, a foundation to build on, not a finished product. That mindset matters, especially for a team that prides itself on accountability and internal pressure. Physically, Ratledge brings a unique profile. At 6'6" and 315 pounds, he is one of the taller guards in the NFL. That size can be an advantage, but it also comes with technical challenges, particularly when it comes to leverage. Winning in the trenches is often about pad level, and Ratledge has openly acknowledged that this is an area that must improve sooner rather than later. In his exit interview, this was a major point of emphasis between him and the coaching staff. Being tall means you cannot afford to play high, and Ratledge knows that correcting his pad level is essential if he wants to take the next step. Then there is the positional conversation. Lions head coach Dan Campbell made it clear that moving Ratledge to center is not off the table. That does not mean it will happen, but it does show how the team views his versatility and potential value. Ratledge himself said he is more comfortable at right guard, which is natural given that is where he started all 17 games. But he also made it clear he is willing to play wherever the team needs him. That attitude fits exactly with how this roster has been built under Campbell. The context around the offensive line makes this even more important. There are expected changes and increased competition up front. What happens at center is still to be determined, and there is also uncertainty at left tackle if veteran Taylor Decker were to retire. Campbell has already said the team will bring in players to compete, stressing that competition is how you elevate the roster. That applies to veterans and young players alike, and Ratledge will not be handed anything going into year 2. The urgency comes from the numbers, and the standard this group has already set. Detroit's pass blocking win rate last season was 56%, ranking 31st in the NFL. Their run block win rate was 71%, ranking 20th. Those numbers are not what this team expects. In 2023, when the Lions reached the NFC Championship game, and in 2024, when they finished 15-2, the offensive line was a dominant force. It kept Jared Goff clean and fueled a consistent, explosive run game. That is the benchmark, and everyone in that room knows it. Ratledge admitted that seeing how this offensive line performed in previous seasons and knowing they did not meet that level last year has lit a fire under him and the rest of the group. There is a clear sense of urgency to get back to playing dominant football. Where Ratledge ultimately lines up in 2026 will be sorted out during the offseason. But what is clear is his role in the conversation about fixing this unit. His growth from week 1 to the end of the season shows why the Lions believe in him, and his own dissatisfaction shows why he believes there is another level to reach. Now, it comes down to development, competition, and whether this offensive line can reclaim its identity. And I want to know what you think about Tate Ratledge's rookie season and his role in getting the Lions' offensive line back to that dominant standard. The challenge now is turning that fire into results. Because improvement in the NFL is never automatic, especially along the offensive line where chemistry, technique, and trust all collide on every snap. What stands out with Tate Ratledge is that his development is happening in the middle of a broader reset for this unit. The Lions are not tearing everything down, but they are clearly demanding a return to the identity that defined their best seasons. That identity starts up front, and it starts with players who are willing to look in the mirror and admit when the standard was not met. Ratledge's situation perfectly reflects where Detroit is as a team. On one hand, there is evidence on film that he can be a reliable starter. A rookie guard playing over 1,000 snaps, starting all 17 games, and finishing the year without allowing a sack over his final 12 games is not insignificant. That level of availability and durability matters. On the other hand, the overall offensive line performance shows there is no room for comfort. Ranking near the bottom of the league in pass block win rate is not something this staff is willing to accept, especially with a quarterback like Jared Goff, who is at his best when operating from a clean pocket. This is where Ratledge's comments about pad level and technique become so important. He is not talking about small tweaks. He is talking about foundational elements of playing guard in the NFL. For a taller interior lineman, pad level is the difference between controlling a rep and getting walked back into the pocket. It affects the run game, the pass game, and even how defenses attack you. The fact that this has already been identified and emphasized in exit interviews tells you exactly where the coaching staff's focus will be when off-season work begins. There is also the mental side of this, which often gets overlooked. Being mentioned as a potential option at center, even if it never becomes permanent, means Ratledge has to understand the offense at a deeper level. Centers are responsible for communication, adjustments, and identifying fronts. Even preparing for that possibility can accelerate a young lineman's football IQ, and even if he remains at right guard, that expanded understanding can only help him react faster and play with more confidence. Competition is coming, and that is not a threat. It is the environment Dan Campbell wants. This staff believes that the best version of a player comes out when nothing is guaranteed. Whether it is at guard, center, or simply fighting to hold on to a starting role, Ratledge will be part of a group that is pushed every single day. That pressure is exactly what helped build the dominant offensive lines of 2023 and 2024. And it is what the Lions are trying to recreate.
The bigger picture here is that Detroit does not need Tate Ratledge to be perfect. They need him to take the next step. They need him to turn late-season consistency into a full-season standard. They need him to clean up leverage issues, win more consistently at the point of attack, and help restore the physical tone that once made this offense so difficult to defend. If that happens, the ripple effect is massive. It helps the run game, it protects Goff, and it allows the entire offense to function the way it was designed to. This offseason is about accountability, growth, and reclaiming an identity. Ratledge has already shown growth. Now comes the harder part, proving that year one was not the peak, but the floor. Another layer to this conversation that cannot be ignored is how the Lions internally evaluate progress versus impact. Tate Ratledge's rookie season is a perfect case study of that balance. Statistically and on film, the improvement is real, especially late in the year. But inside that building, improvement alone is never the finish line. The standard is dominance, and that is the word that keeps coming up when players and coaches talk about the offensive line at its best in Detroit. Ratledge is now chasing that version of himself, not just a cleaner stat sheet. What makes this offseason so critical is timing. The Lions are not a rebuilding team anymore. Expectations are high, the window is open, and every position group is being evaluated through the lens of championship-level performance. For young players like Ratledge, that means development has to happen fast, and it has to translate directly to wins. There's no patience for stagnation, especially in the trenches where games are often decided before the ball ever leaves the quarterback's hand. It is also important to understand that offensive line play is deeply connected. One player's pad level, footwork, or communication affects everyone next to him. If Ratledge cleans up his leverage and becomes more consistent snap to snap, it elevates the entire right side of the line. If he becomes more comfortable handling stunts, blitzes, and late movement, it gives the coaching staff more flexibility in how they design protections. These are the hidden ways a young guard can change an offense without casual fans always noticing. The Lions have made it clear they are going to challenge this group. New faces, internal competition, and positional flexibility will all be part of the plan. That environment will test Ratledge mentally as much as physically. Can he take coaching, apply it quickly, and show up each week as a more refined player? Can he handle the pressure of knowing nothing is guaranteed while still playing free and aggressive? Those answers will define his second season more than any single statistic. There's also leadership to consider. Even as a young player, Ratledge has been in the lineup every week. Availability builds trust. If his performance continues to rise, his voice will naturally carry more weight in the room. That is how offensive lines become cohesive units again, through players who have been through adversity together and come out sharper on the other side. The Lions do not need miracles from Tate Ratledge. They need progression that matches their ambition. They need the version of him that showed up late in the season to be the version that shows up in week 1 next year. If that happens, this offensive line has a real chance to reclaim the physical edge that once defined Detroit football and made this team one nobody wanted to face. When you zoom out even further, what makes Tate Ratledge's situation so compelling for Lions fans is that he represents the crossroads between promise and expectation. This organization has moved past the phase where young players are praised simply for surviving their first year. Now, the conversation is about whether a player can be part of a unit that dictates games. Ratledge's rookie season showed he belongs in the league. His second season will determine whether he can help define it for Detroit. The Lions' offensive philosophy depends heavily on trust up front. The run game does not work unless linemen consistently win leverage battles. The passing game does not fully open up unless the quarterback feels secure stepping into throws. When that trust breaks down, even slightly, it shows up in efficiency, timing, and rhythm. Ratledge's late season improvement helped stabilize things, but stability is not the same as control. That is the gap the coaching staff is focused on closing. What should excite fans is that Ratledge seems to understand exactly where that gap exists. He is not deflecting responsibility or leaning on excuses. He has openly pointed to technique, pad level, and meeting the offensive line's historical standard as areas where he fell short. That level of self-awareness is often what separates players who plateau from players who make real jumps between year 1 and year 2. This offseason will test how much that awareness translates into action. Strength work, flexibility, leverage drills, and film study all become magnified. Every rep in camp will matter more because the Lions are no longer evaluating in isolation. They are comparing. They are measuring each lineman against the version of this unit that carried them deep into the postseason in previous years. That is the measuring stick, and Ratledge is being held to it just like everyone else. For Detroit, the stakes are clear. Getting back to dominant offensive line play is not a luxury, it is a requirement. Everything else on offense flows from that foundation. For Ratledge, the opportunity is just as clear. He has already earned trust through availability and growth. Now he has the chance to turn that trust into long-term belief. And this is where the conversation naturally turns toward accountability, because on a team like the Lions, accountability is not just something coaches talk about, it is something players feel every day. Tate Ratledge is stepping into a year where expectations are heavier, not lighter. There is no longer the cushion of being a rookie learning on the fly. Every rep will be judged against what this offensive line has already proven it can be, and that pressure is intentional. It is how this staff separates contributors from cornerstones. The encouraging part is that Ratledge's trajectory suggests he is wired for that kind of environment. The mistakes early in the season did not break him. They forced adjustments. The improvement late in the year did not satisfy him. It motivated him. That mindset aligns with what Detroit is trying to build, a roster full of players who are never comfortable being average, even when the outside perception says they are doing fine. This offseason is about sharpening details, leverage, footwork, hand placement, communication, all the things that do not show up in highlight reels but decide games in December and January. If Ratledge takes a real step forward in those areas, his impact goes beyond his own performance. It helps reestablish the physical tone this team needs to impose on opponents. It helps the offense stay on schedule. It helps restore confidence across the entire unit. For Lions fans, this is why watching the offensive line battle in camp will matter so much. It will tell you whether this group is ready to reclaim its edge or if more changes are still coming. Ratledge will be right in the middle of that evaluation, not as a project, but as a player who is expected to contribute to winning football right now. What ultimately defines whether this works or not is consistency, because the gap between a good offensive line and a dominant one is rarely talent alone. It is repetition, discipline, and trust built snap after snap. For Tate Ratledge, that means proving that the player he became late in the season is not situational, not streaky, and not dependent on who lines up next to him. It means showing that his floor has risen, not just that his ceiling exists. The Lions are very aware that their margin for error has shrunk. When this team was climbing, development could happen in waves. Now, development has to happen on schedule. Ratledge is part of a group that is being asked to restore an identity that once gave Detroit a clear advantage every single week. That identity was built on controlling the line of scrimmage, wearing defenses down, and dictating tempo. When that disappears, everything else becomes harder. This is why